You wanted more ideas to use your cardstock scraps. Today I share 5 fun ways to use your scraps with a bonus idea. And I'd like to know if you guessed what today's bonus idea is. Alright, so I've got my pile of scraps and I've got some fabulous ideas, starting with Inlay Die Cutting. So this Anemones die set is perfect for this. It's an outline die. It actually has an outline of the whole floral bouquet, but I'm not going to be using the larger outline. I'm just using the inner portion, the one with the flowers, the petals and the leaves. Now start by choosing what cardstocks I want to use, and then the great thing about using up my scraps is I'm able to choose what color I want each flower to be in this bouquet, literally by laying it over the cardstock and die cutting it out. So basically what I need to do is cut it out multiple times. I'm using the same die and I'm making sure to keep each of the pieces of the die. To do the inlay die cutting, I have a piece of 80-pound Neenah cardstock and I'm laying out one of the die cuts so that I can kind of work out which way I want my image to sit on this panel. I have basically just laid it down over top and then I can adhere it with some low-tack tape and run it through my die cutting machine. Make sure that you keep all of the tiny little pieces. Another way to do this would be to cut a piece larger than you need, and then you could die cut the panel down after if you weren't wanting to try and deal with some of the edges. I find it easier to do it this way, but whatever works for you. On my card front, I used a lot of dotted adhesive. I find it's quite forgiving. It works well for me, but you could use whatever adhesive you like, including liquid glues. I laid the Neenah panel over top on the front of the card, and then basically I just put the outline of the die in and then paper pieced the die cuts, and I kind of made each flower a different color, and that was easy to do because I just cut it out of different colored cardstock, although these papers I think came from the same paper pad. That way I knew they'd go together really well. Sometimes the hardest thing is finding those little pieces, and you can spend hours looking for them. So one of the best things about this card is it's awesome for postage because you can actually make this card all one level, one layer, and you know that it's not going to get damaged in the post or cost extra postage. And to get the flower centers, the color I wanted, I literally just used an alcohol marker to change the color up by coloring over top. This is a fabulous way to use up your crafty scraps. You can use even small pieces to get the right color for something. Have a look at your outline die cut images and see what you can create. I also added a wonderful script sentiment to the front. So this really would have been almost a 1-layer card, but I did have to come in and add some dewdrops because I can't help but embellish a little bit. So my next technique today, and it's one of my favorites, is to actually color on scrap cardstock. So I just literally hold over the image that I'm going to be doing over the cardstock that I want to stamp it on and just sort of see how it looks. You can do this on lots of different kinds of cardstock, and I chose to use the Rainbows. It's a sampler pack from Waffle Flower Craft, purely because I thought it'd be fun to have a rainbow background with these cute penny black dogs. This is an older set called Friendship, but you can use whatever you have. It doesn't have to be critters. You could use flowers. It's a very forgiving technique. So a couple of things to note. Pencils are really the best way to add color to cardstock like this because typically it's not very thick, and alcohol markers just make the paper wet. Although you could try it if you've got a nice thick cardstock. I would usually choose lighter colors to color on so that I know that I'm going to be able to see my image in the end. If you've got lots of bold patterns in the background that can really interfere with your image, I also like to test the colours on the same cardstock that I'm colouring. That way I know exactly how they're going to look, because the background colour is really going to affect what the colour looks like. When I'm colouring with the pencils, I really like to use a soft touch. That way I can keep adding other colours on top. If you lay the pencil down too heavily, then it's going to fill the tooth of the paper and you're not going to be able to add other colours and blend. I don't typically use blending solutions like Gamsol, as I find they're not as forgiving on these coloured cardstocks, but you could try it on a scrap piece if you think your image needs it. But typically I find just blending with the coloured pencils themselves is enough. And to make my life easier, you might also notice that I'm using pencil extenders on some of my shorter pencils just to make it easier for me to colour with them. So after I've finished my colouring, I do like to come and re-stamp my image with the pigment ink. I'm using the Nocturne here, which is what I originally stamped my image with, but you could use whatever black inks that you have. It's just sometimes you'll find the Prismacolor pencils, the wax will bloom over the image and that just crisps up the edges. And I'm using one of my align tools to make sure that I get it nice and straight on the front of my design. And I do that inside my MISTI. Right, so now I want to add a sentiment speech bubble, and I want to quickly show you that you can pretty much make any sentiment that you have into a speech bubble. It doesn't have to be round, although I did choose to do this one as a round one, but you could cut it with your trimmer if you wanted to do a square or a rectangle one. But literally I just cut a triangle from the same cardstock. This time I'm using black, but you could do this with white as well, and adhere that to the back of my die cut sentiment. I did the Casual Greetings You Rock and embossed that with some white embossing powder. And I always like to add a second die cut behind that, or just some scrap cardstock, because I want to pop it up. I just want that to be a little bit more stable or sturdy. So why not grab some cardstock scraps and stamp an image or two and colour them with your pencils and see what you can come up with. Maybe you might even add a speech bubble sentiment. Alright, we're on to technique number 3 now, and this time I'm going to be doing some paper piecing, and I don't know why I didn't do this in my first video. And just in case you missed it, I actually have another video with 6 different ideas on how to use your scrap cardstock, and I'm going to link that at the end of this video, but it'll also be in the description below. I have this really cute image from the Rabbit Hole Designs, and it's called Caffeinated Fox, and I wanted this fox to have a sort of a tartan or a plaid coat. And originally I was thinking one of these other sort of more masculine designs, but as soon as I saw the lawn fawn plaid in the rainbow colors, it just had to be that. And the way that you do paper piecing is to stamp multiples of an image. So this particular image, I had to stamp it 4 times. Once for the card front, once for the coat, once for one of the hands, and once for the cup. So I decided to color my image in with some Copic markers, but you could leave this as line art if you're not comfortable coloring or you don't have time. This would look fun having just that paper pieced coat and cup and line art for the rest of the fox. But what a cute image. I'll also list everything that I possibly can in the description below, but there'll be a full list of supplies at my blog. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So I did include some of the colouring here, but not the whole of the image, because this is more about the technique than the actual colouring. The paper piecing part is very easy. Basically, I have stamped the image on the cardstock, on the scrap piece of cardstock, and I'm cutting it out with my scissors. It's fussy cutting, so I'm cutting along the line. You might notice that I'm moving the paper more than I'm moving the scissors. It's easier to cut that way. The trick is to take your time. There is no rush. So when it came to the cup, I did actually cut the hand away because I wanted it to look like it was inside the dressing gown, and I thought that might work, but you could just as easily paper piece the hand on top with the cup. After you've done the cutting, it pays to come along with a either black or grey marker and cover the edges of the paper cut piece. There's lots of words there. Edging from the back. That way if you slip with the marker, it won't end up on your finished project. And don't use alcohol markers for this. On the thin cardstock, you'll find that they bleed. To take the paper piecing one step further, add some shading with some alcohol markers or with some pencils. To layer the pieces together, I just simply use some liquid glue. It's nice, fast drying, and as long as you don't add too much, the cardstock won't warp. Love this fox, so cool. To ground the image, I also used some alcohol markers, but you could do this with a pencil. You don't even need to do the grounding at all. But because this was a really nice, clean and simple card design, I like to ground my images. And I always work on a separate piece of cardstock so that you can't see the alcohol marker on the inside of the card design. When it comes to scrap cardstock and paper piecing, your options really are endless. It just can come down to what stamps you have. You can do this with images like I did with the critters. You can do it with images of houses, with little people, even floral designs. You can take this wherever your stamps and your scraps let you. So on to our next technique, and this one is layering stencils. So I'm creating my own background panel, and I've chosen 3 different kinds of design paper scraps, and I've used some double-sided adhesive, some A4 double-sided adhesive to cover a piece of scrap cardstock, deactivating the edges of it just with a powder tool so it doesn't annoy me while I'm working. And I'm using my little cutout template from my A2 window to work out where I'm going to center the design. I have the coordinating die here. That's just going to make it easier for me to work out where to start my image. And I want to start with my lightest ink. I've got the Cherry Blossom set of inks here, and now that I've got my starting point, I can come in with my ink blending tool and start adding color. So I'm going to add the layers of the stencil just as you normally would on white cardstock, but because I've chosen some pale grays, that's kind of going to allow the image to progress and be seen on top of this background panel that I've created. The panel is bigger than I need, and that works well for me because then I can just cut out the portion that I want to use on the front of the card. So once I got my starting point, it was really easy to work out where the rest of the image needed to be and work through the layers of the stencil. These layering stencils they're all different, and they have guides often on the packaging, but if you can't find the guide on how to layer up and which colors to use on what layer, then head to the design website. So wherever you buy the stencils from, like Altenew, if you go to this particular, like the Bitterroot flower on their website, on their storefront, then it will give you the layering guide there, and lots of ideas as well, like lots of the designers' ideas and what they've used this image for and created it into cards. So when it came to the leaf images, I decided to use the Nature's Wonders set of colors, which is a really, it's almost like a muted set of greens. It's really, really pretty and one of my favorite sets to use. And you don't have to use like a grey or a neutral. You could easily do the same thing with the layering stencil on a pale coloured background. That would look incredible. All right, so I worked out what portion I wanted. I wanted this to cover the whole front of a card. So I'm using my A2 rectangle die cut and added that to the front of my side fold A2 card. And I didn't actually do the center of the flowers until I decided what the sentiment was going to be, because I wasn't sure if it's going to be black or gold. And once I decided on gold, I thought, well, the center of the flowers would look really pretty with that gold element as well. So I did that with some ink and a gel pen and added a thanks, which is from the Sweet Sentiments die set, and I layered that up to pop up on the front of the card. So layering stencils can give you many options, and don't just think flowers. Geometric patterns would look awesome on top of a design paper background. All right, so we're on to the final technique, and we're going to be framing it. Yes, we're going to be using cardstock scraps to create a frame. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the bonus technique that's coming up very soon. But basically what I've done here is add some adhesive to a piece of scrap white cardstock, and I'm using some colored design paper to create a patterned background, which I'm going to cut a frame from. I don't want two colors to be touching each other, and I want the pattern to be kind of changing up a little bit as well. So the great thing about this cardstock is it's double-sided, so I can come in and use both sides of the cardstock, and I've chosen similar cardstock scraps and made them sort of create a pattern. Alright, so I've used the Creator Wreath die from Altenew here to cut an oval window, but you could just as easily use nesting dies to do a similar thing. I decided in the end that I wanted to use a panel on the front of the card as well, and I wasn't really sure initially whether I could use the eclipse sort of style where I used the pattern where it flowed through, or whether I flipped the oval and created something that was more patchworky. I've got my Misty tool here, and I'm using my align tool again just to make sure that my panel's going to be lined up correctly on the front of my card. And while I've got this in my Misty, I decided to add a sentiment from the Casual Greetings set, and I'm using some Nocturne ink to do that. A nice bold greeting in the center of my, wait for it, shaker card. All right, so you may have an idea where I'm going with this. This is my bonus technique for today. Use your small scraps to create shaker elements. I have this die from Alan Hudson, which is from a set called Yay, and it creates confetti bits. It's basically built for this, but you could do the same thing with a hole punch. It's going to take longer, but you can still get the same or similar result. You could do this with little tiny mini punches, with mini die cuts. Check out your die sets and see what you've got to create shaker elements with. So I got this idea from Maaike, and you can check out her blog and YouTube channel. I'm going to link both of those. And check out this bit of cardstock. Do you reckon I should keep that, or are we done? Yes, that one's going in the bin. And I also used my powder tool to deactivate the stick on the inside of the shaker well, so the cardstock didn't stick there when you shook it. The great thing about this cardstock and creating a shaker card is that it's double-sided. So if this cardstock flips over, I'm not going to have the white back of the cardstock, and it's all going to match because each of them is coordinating from the same set of papers. And I added some really cute images from Ice Cream Stand. For me, this card feels like it's almost like a quilt and a definite scrap paper pieced card. I'm not sure if you agree or not, but it's still pretty, and I love the rainbow colors together. Imagine creating a wonderful shaped multicolored frame patched together with some really fun cardstocks. And all together now we've got the Inlay Die Cutting, colouring on design paper. Then we did some paper piecing. Then we did some layered stencil ink blending. And my final card with the bonus technique was to frame it. And the bonus technique was to shake it. Let me know in the comments below which card was your favourite today, and if you want to see more of this kind of video. I hope you're inspired to use your scraps, and if you were, it'd be great if you could click on the thumbs up button. And if you don't want to miss out on my next video, then don't forget to click the subscribe button and the bell icon. Now, I've linked the first video using cardstock scraps, just in case you missed it, and I look forward to seeing you there. Till next time, happy paper crafting. Bye.